Well, welcome everyone to our annual home tour lecture. This year, we are doing it in a different format. We're going to do it in a panel format. I am Dr. Chris Laws, the Executive Director of Preservation Durham, and it is my honor to introduce our moderator. But before I do that, I would like to send a special thank you to our sponsor. Our home tour lecture panel is sponsored this year by Garland Ventures, and we are very appreciative of their contribution that allows us to do all of the good work that we do. So without further ado, I will introduce our moderator for this panel, Alicia Hilton Daniel, who is the owner of Hilton Daniel Design and Construction. One of her houses is on our tour this year, Then and Now Part 2. It is the one at 1505 Carolina Avenue, a post-war house in the Watts-Hillendale neighborhood. So make sure, if you haven't already bought tickets, please go ahead and buy them. It looks like we're going to have great weather for part of the weekend, at least. So, but I'll turn it over to you, Alicia, and there you go.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really excited to introduce our panelists. We'll start off with Kathleen Turner. Kathleen is the Regional Director of Preservation North Carolina's Piedmont office based in Durham. Kathleen's work with Preservation North Carolina includes neighborhood revitalization in East Durham and rural and urban preservation issues in the Piedmont region. Second, we have Alva Horton. Alva has a classical education in interior design, studio art, and holds a master's degree in architecture history. She is the founder and director of the Assemblage Studio. Alva sits on our local historic board commission. And then we have Ian Kipp. Ian is a broker with Berkshire Hathaway. He has spent 15 plus years working in downtown development in both public and private sectors. Ian is a member of the Home Tour Planning Committee, and he has sold and renovated many older and historic homes in Durham. We also have with us Toby Walter. Toby is the relatively new owner of the Bartlett Mangum house, the Bartlett Mangum house known as the Four Square, which is also featured on our tour. The home was built in 1908. Toby has made the investment to preserve this historic building into his family home. And we look forward to learning more about your home, Toby. And finally, we have John Fish. And John is the owner of Acanthus Construction based in Durham. Acanthus Construction has been in business since 2005. Acanthus Construction has been Durham's premier home renovation company, specializing in old home renovations and fine carpentry. John and his team do remarkable work that is always featured on Preservation Durham's home tours. So welcome, everyone. All right, so we'll just dive in since we have 1 hour with our first question. So we have a series of questions, and the first question is posed at Kathleen, and then the follow-up also by Alva. So my first question is, what is the importance of historic preservation in our community, and how does it contribute to the identity and character of our city and our county? And Kathleen, we'll start off with you.
Right, and we only have an hour?
Yes.
So yeah, how do you encapsulate what historic preservation is done, I guess specifically in Durham, since I work for a statewide historic preservation nonprofit, and my regional office is based in Durham, and I cover 30 counties. So I see historic preservation at work in a variety of different communities and contexts, from rural to urban, from small neighborhoods to large buildings, you know, in a city. And so what does historic preservation contribute toward the community, toward its character? I would say, I guess to distill it down, it checks all the boxes of quality of life, cultural connection, environmental responsibility, sustainable economic development. And let's not forget beauty. I know that for a long time now, historic preservationists have felt compelled to, make economic arguments and bottom line arguments for historic preservation. And that's very important because, frankly, utilizing historic preservation as a tool within your community makes good economic sense. We can talk about the numbers all you want, but at the end of the day, we're also dealing with beautiful buildings, well-built buildings, and what an individual building contributes toward an entire streetscape. And then again, what the entire streetscape communicates. And then within the context of a neighborhood. And so I guess these places are about, and historic preservation rather, is about people saving the places that matter to them. And it's also a framework for telling the story of where we came from, you know, where our community is today and where we aspire to go. It's the framework for telling the story. It's a framework around conversations, whatever that conversation in the community, the neighborhood is. It can take place within the context of one building, but then applied writ large, it's really allowed us to take full advantage of the community assets within Durham, from downtown to its individual neighborhoods to an individual building. And it's all about people and where people live and what matters to the people who use that building.
Great, thank you. And Alva?
Well, buildings are much like artifacts, or they're tangible primary resources from an academic standpoint. So they can teach us a lot. And the National Trust puts it as they can fill in the gaps in our cultural heritage. And I think in communities, especially like ours in the South, especially in rapidly gentrifying and changing communities, preserving that cultural heritage where there are gaps in the history that has been told is even more important.
Thank you, Alva. All right, well, next question is for Ian. So how can we support preservation while educating our community with the need for new development and growth, especially as Durham continues to grow? Ian, your microphone's off.
Let's try that.
There you go.
Okay.
Welcome.
So I just want to say that there's clearly the area is booming. People are moving in. People want to be here. There's low inventory, and I think the community knows that we're a boom town. And so I think where the education may need to be is the new expanded housing choices that was created a couple of years ago by the city council to allow basically small homes, to allow small lots, no more than, it can be as small as 2,000 feet, with homes that are 1,200 feet. And so it's really changed the landscape. And that's important because I obviously, this is a challenge for preservation because a developer can build 4 houses on a half an acre lot. And those are conforming lots, not even small lots. And the number signs are going to be there to do that. Where I think, and I could talk about this all day, and obviously I have very short order. So I think there's a silver lining in the expanded housing choices, because I think there's the opportunity to preserve existing homes and then actually cut off small lots or conforming lots off the existing large lot and leave the old house alone. So I don't know if we've seen this. I don't know if Kathleen's seen this, but I think there's an opportunity to educate the community, especially anyone who lives on more than a quarter of an acre, because depending on where the house sits, it creates this opportunity for redevelopment. So again, challenges to the market. Challenges. The market is just booming so fast. I'm sure people saw the Guardian article. It creates for a lot of, the other thing that I want to talk about is, preservation is key, but it sort of is getting swept under the rug because you see these chicken coop homes popping up and you see these small houses popping up. so I really think it's hyper important to continue to tell the story as those of us preservationists are doing, those people interested, and of course, keeping the historic fabric. It's just that we are now under duress with this building boom that we're in, with these small houses popping up. So I think this is an important thing to kind of bring to the forefront of our preservation discussion. So I'll just leave it there.
All right, thank you, Ian. All right, the next question is for Toby. So Toby, what are some successful examples of historic preservation you have seen in Durham? And did any of the examples influence the renovation of your building? And I'd love to hear a little bit about your house as well, the building itself.
Yeah, right on. It's been an interesting journal. I kind of stumbled into all of this just by falling in love with a house and then learning that it's historic, then trying to figure out how you renovate it and all of the above. I'll make a quick intro for the house. This is a pretty long story, but I'm from Germany originally. I came over to Durham in 2008 and been here 14 years now. I co-founded a software company here, and in 2018, we were on the verge of selling that business. And looking back, I think a story that a lot of entrepreneurs have is I look back at the last 10 years and realized I've done 2 vacations in those 10 years for a week each. And I think in those 10 years for only 1 week, I turned my email off ever. So I said, I'm going to take a sabbatical year after I sell this business. And I wanted to find a project for myself. I wanted to do something actually with my hands and not, on emails and clouds and web, something where you can see at the end of the day what you did. So to make a long story short, well, for the longest time, I had in mind that I would buy a 1960s rusted through Porsche and put it in my garage and, wake up in the morning, make a big cup of coffee and try to figure out what I do next on that car. I drove by the Mangum house on my way from dropping off my kid at daycare, going into the office, and saw that available sign out there. And I said, or maybe I'm going to renovate an old house. So I can catch up on that story a lot. But to your question, the route ultimately I went was trying to find contractors that specifically had experience, dealing with historic homes. I think for everybody watching, you have a terrific group of people here, right, that can help you. That unfortunately I'm only meeting now about 3 years in, but I kind of took the role as, I would say, general contractor and still worked full-time in renovation of the house while I outsourced some areas that I didn't do. I didn't want to touch plumbing, electricity, and gas was my rule in the beginning. So I would break through walls and frame and do hardwood floors and all of that, but then bring in experienced folks. And there is a ton of really great ones in Durham. I mean, very small firms too. I remember I somehow ran into a historic restoration carpenter, a guy who does it all by himself. He actually has a house on Arnett Avenue too, that's from about the same age. And he was just a terrific person to walk me through the idea of, right, you don't want to make everything new, or you don't want to start replacing things that might have a little crack here and there. So he was incredible, just walking through a house and saying, all right, let's look for structural integrity first. Like, which wood pieces might we have to fix for integrity? Second, right, where can we still restore some? And third, where do we really need something new? And can we just switch out one block and kind of make it look the same and the like? So with selecting a lot of contractors like that, I had the experience again and again that they showed me houses around. I remember a couple in Chapel Hill on Franklin Street I looked at. I remember looking at 2 or 3 in Hope Valley, and then typically at specific things. Some people would say, well, look, right, I had this railing on the stairs and I wasn't quite sure if that should be in the middle on the side, if it should be swung, and people sent me around and said, hey, they actually did something great on their driveway, or here's a few houses that have the same area. And Open Durham, I would say, was the other huge resource in that, right? Trying to find houses that would match about that house age and just seeing what was common back then, how do those look like right now, and what have other people done. Those were all tremendous resources.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Toby. All right. Next question is for John Fish, and also for Alva again. How can designers architects, and builders incorporate historic elements and materials into new construction projects while still meeting modern building codes and standards? And if you can, feel free to give a few examples.
So I Chris emailed this out to us, and I looked at the question, and I mean, that's the whole thing with what we do, Alicia. I mean, it's match materials to what we are working on. I think that a lot of material decisions can be made based on what's millable, because a lot of times you're trying to match a specific, exterior or interior trim detail. And those are questions that can easily be asked at a local building supply store. Fitch Lumber and Carrboro is a great resource. Talbot Building Supply here, they're terrific. And certainly there are a lot of good contractors in Durham that would be happy to answer these questions about what materials to use, as long as you don't, as long as people are respectful of their time. But a simple email is a great way. More broadly, I think that there are very skilled designers and architects in town who are very good at replicating the space and the historic fabric of the home into modern renovations, because we all want to be a little more energy efficient and have more durable materials. So anyway, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think, also in terms of like, these open space layouts, right? Women want larger kitchens, right? Back in the day,
Sure,
you closed off and you have a little box. Also thinking about like crawl spaces, right? Like, I don't know, old homes tend to have very wet basements. I'm living in the 1930s Foursquare. This is my basement. It cost a lot just to get it to be dry and livable. So those sorts of modern amenities, having a good dehumidifier in my space is always key. It's turned off right now because it's pretty loud. And I'd love for you to add to the conversation as well.
Yeah, I have a couple of points. The first one is probably a little spiritual and woo for some people, but my sort of guiding principle is thinking in every project about who, and this is how I feel like I try and move through our city as well, is thinking about who was here before us and how we can honor them in our cultural and our built heritage. And second to that, I think it takes more thoughtfulness and more research, and using, just like Toby was saying, using the resources either at the library or Open Durham to really go back and see, especially from a commercial standpoint, how these buildings and houses were used previously. I'm working on 2 projects right now, commercial projects, where there are exposed brick, and there's murals actually on those brick, but it's inside the building, which is amazing and gives us huge insight, things that have been covered for so long that we don't even know what was there before. And they're kind of exciting things as you peel away the layers on these renovations. And I think doing the extra work, Alicia, even just like leaving the brick in your basement and exposing that, from a design standpoint, it adds texture, it adds character, it adds a richness that you cannot replicate with modern materials. Old brick looks different than new brick. It also performs differently, which means that like sometimes it's not always salvageable. And that would be my third point, that I think it's important that designers and architects and developers have we recognize that we have a responsibility to the planet. And preserving a home or a commercial building is always a greener option, and as opposed to building something new. But having said that, there's a caveat there. Not always possible within current building codes, state codes, et cetera. North Carolina and California have the strictest building codes for obvious reasons, hurricanes and earthquakes, of anywhere else in the country, which means that we can't always preserve everything that we want to. And I think there has to be room for, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later, but room for dialogue around that, and room for, especially within the public spheres like this one, really asking questions instead of leading with judgment, because a lot of times you just simply, it's out of your hands, whether it's a partial demolition or a full demolition tear down of a building. It's just not always possible. And those are difficult situations that designers and architects and preservationists and developers face every day.
Thank you. Thank you both so
I was
much.
gonna, Alicia, if I may, I'll make one quick ad for the DIYers
Sure.
here. I think one of the materials I've used the most was Abatron wood restoration kit. Right, and just to push the idea of not just replacing right out of the gate. This one is one that one of the carpenters recommended to me, and it's an incredible one. I had some pillars that had about this diameter that at times were rotted down to about this diameter, and we actually filled those back up. There's a wood glue that you put in the remaining part of the wood that hardens that. You can putty around, and you can get those to look really great again. So for any DIYer who has that, 50 or 100-year-old window and actually wants to keep it, Abatron is a big recommendation of mine.
You're giving away our trade secrets.
I know. And I
Knock it off.
I also want to just add, we've also suffered a lot of losses, John, and I don't know if you can add on to this, but just our window restorations, right? There was one time where we had many fine carpenters that you would reach out to for window restoration in the Durham area, and I can only think of one at this time. Otherwise, we're going, west, right? And also in terms of talking about modern access or modern amenities, that lead glass is beautiful, but it's single pane, and a lot of times my clients cannot afford to restore 40 windows, so we would get windows that qualify. So there's certain companies that make a window. It's not lead glass, it's not the beautiful wavy glass, but they do qualify for the historic. Add to the conversation as well.
So windows are a big deal for me.
They are.
when we have so we hire a lot of young people, and we have summer interns that are young people. And one of the first things we teach them is how to restore old windows. The material in old windows, like in these houses you see around Durham, it's 100 years old. Nothing you buy right now is going to look like that in 100 years. Fix those old windows. It will pay for itself. Most research now shows you either through energy savings or costs, you will not pay for new windows in your house in the lifetime that you live in the house. So we teach our carpenters how to glaze windows, strip windows, cut the glazing out. In fact, two of my folks are working on that right now over in Old North Durham. And there are companies that are actually like Bentheim Glass up in Massachusetts. You can order historic glass already cut that has variations of, or varying degrees of waviness in it. We've done that a few times, especially if we need tempered panes in bathrooms or something like that. We'll get tempered historic glass. What was the rest of the question, Alicia? You got me.
I think that's great. Well, I think learning about windows, right? I think learning about like what are the options, right? Should you decide that you want to save the windows? How do you make them energy efficient if they're a single pane? Do you just recommend doing like the storms on them?
I hate the way storms detract from
the
look of the window. So I'm not gonna say that, Alicia.
Yeah.
But yes, okay. I mean,
yeah.
It's the best way. I would also say, once you reglaze them and you set the panes of glass in a bead of caulk, it's pretty good. It's pretty tight. And there's a great old article from This Old House magazine that went in detail for how to weather strip an old window. And it's DIY friendly. It's something a homeowner could do, one window at a time on a weekend. So that's a great resource. If you either go to the library or look online, you can look up that old article. And Fine Home Building has done a couple of articles like that as well. So.
Thanks.
I want to add that Forbes magazine was about 3 years ago, did an article on why you should repair, restore, and keep your existing historic windows because it makes economic sense. Forbes. So, right. So if you don't believe the preservationists, and just to add on to what John was saying, historic windows were designed to be repaired. so you can repair them
Yeah.
even when they look really ragged.
Yeah.
Replacement windows were designed to be replaced. So if you want to get into that cycle of replacing your replacement windows every 10 to 20 years, okay. But you get tax credits for repairing the historic existing windows.
Mhm.
Hard to argue it.
I'll
And
make one
the
other
energy
note.
savings is the energy savings is so small. Yeah.
I'll make one other note, if I may, kind of on how broad you can think about alternatives. So Windows is one I've struggled with. I'll pick your all's brains after the tour on those as well. Because for mine, there's some stained glass in there, so much intricate detail where I just didn't know how I would even start tackling it. My thought was, what I ultimately got to was to say, well, look, I know these will be less energy efficient. How about I throw some solar panels on my roof and just create my own electricity to cool the house down in the summer? Then I don't have to touch the windows, or I went the route of actually foaming around at least a couple of them that weren't needed for egress out of bedrooms. Where I said if they were really shaky, or a car driving by would go to part in it, right? I would try and foam and kind of get it in a good place. But then, as you said about a big part of this tour is to have people that think about buying historic homes to know it's not always one way, right? It's not you buy a house and you have to throw whatever, $500,000 at it to get it perfect. You have a ton of options, what all you can do, what you can do in year 1 versus in year 10 versus in year 50. And again, just for really out there, my route in the end was simply, let me throw some solar panels up, so I don't have to pay for the electricity that it costs to cool the house down when the windows get that warm air right back in.
Windows are obviously a hot topic. Alicia, I'll let you go. But I do just want to note that if you live in one of the city's historic districts, that you really need to talk to the city before you touch anything as far as windows go exterior.
Exactly. Thank you. All right, next question is for Ian and Kathleen. This one is a little longer. So how can we ensure that historic preservation efforts in Durham are inclusive and appropriately examine the city's once historically Black communities? Have we considered race as a factor when we talk about keeping things purist or as is? Do we take into consideration that the South's neighborhoods were segregated and unequal when we promote preservation instead of revitalization or reinvention? Kathleen, I'll start with you.
Well, those are a lot of questions. It's again,
I can simplify, right?
Yeah, that's an entire day conversation, and
But it's one worth having, I think.
It's such an important one, and it's a topic that I believe in fervently. Preservation North Carolina believes in fervently of making space for places that matter to people, and in a community that means all people, because we're all going to look at our community and historic buildings within it through different lenses, and respecting those perspectives and acknowledging those perspectives, and realizing that in order to tell the full story, you need to listen and reflect that in our work in terms of assisting people in preserving the places that matter to them. For example, start with looking around the table and seeing who isn't there, for one thing, and expanding the voices and perspectives and who's adding to the priorities, for example, within an organization, if you're a preservation organization. And I think it's important to, go to people and be proactive, but also, something in the work in terms of preservation work within a neighborhood is not just going in and telling people what you think is missing or what needs to be done. That never works in any context. As a preservationist, I know how to save a building. I know the tools in the toolbox. And, what do you want to do in your neighborhood? How can I help? You know, be the solution and be the tool for helping a neighborhood or a property owner achieve their objective, and just you know, providing that assistance. The second thing is also we as preservationists need to do a better job of communicating, you know, what historic preservation tools are out there to help people achieve whatever preservation objective they have. For example, you know, as Ian spoke a little earlier, you know, Durham is now, you know, seen as a great place to live, and a lot of people want to move here. And so, you know, the entire city is the location. So some neighborhoods, you know, are seeing, you know, more properties being acquired. Maybe, you know, in hot markets in the preservation world, we've seen this for ages, right? You know, small houses, you know, get gobbled up and replaced by, you know, they're tear downs and larger houses. And before long, it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? You start losing a street or losing a neighborhood, you lose the story. And there's a disconnect between, you know, that cultural connection, the history, that made that place special, and that enriches all of us for knowing those places. So it's such a, you know, I come to this question as it's such a huge conversation. There's no way to answer it, you know, with, you know, just a few statements. So bottom line, I think it's incumbent on all of us to, you know, come to the table and want to have the conversation of what's important in our community and to whom, and who's telling the story, and what buildings or streets or neighborhoods matter to you, and how we as preservationists can help. But again, communicate the tools that are available. There's some great tools out there, preservation easements. If you are the owner of a legacy property and you're concerned about what's going to happen to it after you're no longer the steward of that property, let's talk about how you can use a preservation easement to protect that property for future generations. Locally designated historic districts, you know, that can help stem the tear downs. And if a building is lost, at least its replacement, there's a design review process, so it respects context and the streetscape. There are tools in the toolbox in Durham to be utilized by everyone, and we need to do a better job of communicating that.
Thank you. Ian, same question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely talking to people, you know, perhaps existing property owners in neighborhoods that are, you know, have been around for 50 plus years. I think asking them what they want to preserve. I mean, one thing, this isn't about me at all, but one thing I always ask before I list a property is what history can you give me? Who lived here? You know, did anything interesting happen? Did anything uninteresting happen? You know, let's tell the story. And that's, you know, that's hugely important, as Kathleen said. You know, the real estate market is brutal. We've touched on this, and we see what's happening. But one of the good things about the real estate market is it's colorblind. It doesn't have these preconceived notions that human beings have. So while we have to generate for regrowth and for existing property owners to enjoy, obviously, increased property values as other homes begin to get fixed up and property values go up, certainly the cost of land is going up. And again, it's divisible by this expanded housing choices. You know, can I cut a small lot? Can I cut a flag lot? Can I do this? You know, or a developer says, I'm just going to build 4 houses and that's going to be the end of this house. And so the market is both beautiful and ugly. And I think we recognize that it can be ugly, but it can also grow things and not have preconceived notions. So I think that's an opportunity for us. I think there may be the opportunity to talk to existing owners, ask them what they want, ask them and sort of have an upswell about that. I mean, I'm thinking about mid-century homes that we don't think about as the grand historic, 4 square on an acre, which of course I love, but I'm talking about Unity Village, where you've got, a third to half acre lots and, 900 to 1,400 square foot ranches. It's a really cool neighborhood, and it's starting to see the process of the lots getting parsed up, because you can do it as of right. You don't have to go in front of the planning board, the board of adjustment. You can just do it with your surveyor. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for preservation. I just think it would be good, and we certainly want to talk more about this, to create a conversation, create a dialogue, let people tell the history of their neighborhood, and then let's grow on that. I mean, absolutely, we are strong because we are diverse. So let's see, what didn't I answer? As Kathleen said, obviously we could talk about this for a while. The real estate market, obviously we don't talk about race. It's a protected class. We just don't talk about it. That said, respect and sharing information is key. So to me, that's where I think any thought of where we go needs to be, is what do the existing homeowners want? The real estate market is going to self-propel, right? It's going to do what it's allowed to do. So I guess I'll leave it there. Again,
I can add on to that a little bit. One thing that we haven't talked about is, using the National Register of Historic Places as an opportunity here. We've got several historic districts in Durham that have been listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and that in effect documents the architecture and the history of a place or a neighborhood. And we have several in Durham that were designated because of their importance and representation as historically African-American neighborhoods. And that story can be told, and that story can be part of marketing, couldn't it? I mean, it's the history of the place. I'm thinking of College Hill, for one thing, that got great coverage when it was listed in the National Register just a couple years ago. Was it maybe right before COVID or something? It's sort of early to mid 20th century neighborhood near NCCU. A lot of professors and faculty and local Black business leaders were building their houses, and fantastic houses. And it was listed in the National Register, and so property owners, they're eligible for historic tax credits. Again, another key tool in reinvesting in your individual home and the neighborhood. But that's an important story. And that touches on another part of the question, which was, do we take into consideration that the South's neighborhoods were segregated and unequal when we promote preservation instead of revitalization and reinvention? That's an important part of the story. It's an important part of what makes up our community, the history of our community. It's important for us to be honest in that as a community and as preservationists, and acknowledge that history and how some of these neighborhoods came to be and why. And again, acknowledge that and offer whatever preservation tools are available and make sure that people are aware of them. And ensuring that those voices are part of the larger discussion in what gets preserved and how and by whom and who tells the story. Again, we could do an entire day conversation on just this question because there's so many facets of it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also say that we want to make new stories, right? Because African Americans in the world, especially in the South, in terms of wealth and access to wealth and creating generational wealth and legacy just wasn't there. And so I think that there needs to be more emphasis on that, and that a house that was built with not the same resources and access as a house in Trinity Park in a Black neighborhood needs to be acknowledged, and that some of those houses are tear downs because they were not built to last. And that's the conversation that I think that I'd like to have perhaps sometime soon.
Yeah, or how they've evolved over time.
Yeah,
You know,
that
just
giving African Americans
Yeah,
a marker, for a period in history that was, very violent is not enough, right?
yeah,
Marker on
exactly.
Harris Street, putting a marker in Walltown isn't enough. But if African Americans can also be involved in the narrative of revitalizing our neighborhoods and coming back and rebuilding our neighborhoods to represent who we are now, would tell a fabulous story. And I feel like a place like Durham is the place to for it to happen. Because
Absolutely.
for Durham to be Austin, while we love Austin, we just see African American Austin just to go to like church. Their churches are still in these cool in these downtown neighborhoods, but they live so far out, and that again is just like having this conversation that involves everyone. So thank you so much, Kat.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ian. All right. So
Oh, you're most welcome.
yeah, so moving on to the next question, which is for Toby and John. How can homeowners play a role in preserving historic properties in Durham? What resources are available to homeowners who want to preserve and maintain their historic homes? And John, you did a great job providing us with some earlier about windows, as well as Toby, but just, are there any more? Can you further expand on this question?
I would tell people not to be shy, like Toby did, to shoot an email to reputable contractors in this area. They are happy to help. We're glad to see people fixing these houses. And from a cynical business standpoint, we're glad to get our foot in the door and get asked. And Alicia and I have made this our life work. We know stuff. Like, you can ask us stuff, and it's a good resource. Other than that, Fine Home Building Magazine is excellent. I know it's down at the public library. You can reference articles all the way back to the 70s, and This Old House magazine. It's a little bit better for the DIY folks, but they're excellent resources. So.
And Toby, anything?
Yeah, absolutely agree with those. Good channels too, right? Good videos. It's been incredible to me what you can find on YouTube. It's obviously hard to always figure out, is the right person giving the right advice or not? So I would say for my kind of DIY routes, a couple of things I learned there over time is, I think people told me pretty early on, luckily, they said the number one rule of DIY renovations is you got to be okay with doing things twice. Chances are the second time around you do something, you do it once, you're like, okay, now I know how it should have worked. Let me rip that tile back out and start over, right? And the second time around it'll work. But with that said, I think there is really terrific contractors in here. And I think especially the ones that are interested in historic homes, they are also, exactly as John is saying and showing here, they're incredibly interested in working with you or trying to figure things out. I've had in the past the experience too, where, and I get it for a lot of contractors. I think I saw that joke once that was, fixing a car costs $100. If you're watching me while I'm fixing the car, it'll cost you $200. And I get that, right? Homeowners can be too much onto contractors too, but I think there are ones that are really genuinely interested, want to, as Ian said, to understand the story of a house, actually appreciate maybe the idea. If you're saying, well, look, I'm off a day of work, maybe I can be a helper, maybe I can bring things around, right? Or at least I can be there if you're working from home and offer coffee and maybe hear a cool story about how was that built and what was that about and the like. So second, all those resources, Open Durham, of course. This tour, I think, is great to see houses, meet people that have done those, meet the contractors. And then, I mean, this is a terrific starting point here in the group. Absolutely.
Thank you, Toby. So basically, don't be afraid to fail. Try again and do your research. There are resources here, and just a variety of very good craftsmen as well.
Be
So,
smart about what you're touching, right? I'm not sure
yes.
if you're trying to get
Don't
an old
touch
gas tank
asbestos.
out of the house. I'm not sure I want that to go wrong the first time around. But if you are whatever, one of my first like concrete projects was I wanted a fireplace somewhere out there. I was like, okay, let me just figure out if with concrete and stone veneer, if I can put that together. And again, it was the part where if it doesn't look good or work or breaks apart, I'll eventually get a bulldozer. I have to grade this anyways, and I could just, get it out again. But you can step into all of these things kind of very little at a time, right? Or again, when you find good contractors, if that's what people want to do, I think there is somewhere you can work really well with on saying, all right, what can I do and what do you have to do, right? On financing too. Like I remember I tore shingles off my roof, right? I was like, I can get shingles down. I'm not going to touch a roof to redo it because I know it's going to leak if I try that. But are there people that are willing to work with me on saying, hey, look, right, if you get the old stuff down, I can give you this discount or something like that. So I think you find great people around like that too.
Thank you, Toby. I have one more question, but I wasn't sure if we wanted to maybe see if any of our audience had questions. If not, Chris, do we have any questions? Otherwise, I'll go into the last question.
We don't, but if y'all want to type them into the Q&A screen, I will be happy to share them with the panelists.
I will go ahead and say the last question, and it's just like a brief answer. So we have about less than 15 minutes left. What should be the long-term goals of historic preservation in Durham? Are there ways that we can embrace new forms of preservation? And this question is for Alva, Kathleen, and Ian, or whoever else on the panel wants to answer. And I'll start with you, Alva.
Okay. I think Kathleen and Chris can probably answer more policy questions than I can, and I have to be careful since I am on the Historic Preservation Commission for the city. But the first part of the question, policy has to change, and it has to change at the state level. I know that there are a lot of people that are really, and we've touched on that, the subject of tear downs today. According to the state, we as a Historic Preservation Commission, even in historic districts, we can't do anything but delay a house from being torn down 365 days. That's it. So if someone has the capability to wait and to sit on that property for 366 days and then tear it down, we can't do anything to stop that, even in a historic district. So, and I'm not speaking for the city or council or county. I feel like I have to say that this is my opinion, that I, as a citizen of Durham, think that, and of North Carolina, I think that policy can do a tremendous amount of damage to our cultural heritage throughout the state, specifically in areas that were redlined and that were marginalized and that aren't protected by the National Register in any way. And then I think the second part of the question, what sort of new forms of preservation can we enact? I think that's exactly what you said earlier, Alicia. You're here and we're all here and we can all contribute to this dialogue. I think the dialogue needs to be a little bit kinder than what I've seen on some public platforms. I think it needs to be more educated about what policy actually is. And I think that we as citizens can really we have an opportunity to come together and to advocate for the things that we want in a gentle and loving way. I think we all want to live in a city that is prosperous and inclusive and recognizes differences and doesn't just approach things with the old school concept of colorblindness. And I think the new form is making your mark. And even if that's not ownership of a property, but renting a space, you deserve to be here, and we all do. And putting your mark on things, whether it's like, ripping down wallpaper and preserving like one little square of wallpaper in a kitchen that you might hate, but you can like preserve a little square in a frame, or painting, when you take off drywall, painting your name or marking your name on the studs behind that. I think that's a way that you can say, look, I was here, this is who I am, and this is how long I was here, and this is a photo, or these are things that people 100 years from now hopefully will still, there will still be a planet, and there are things that will go into that continued history and to continue to tell that story of Durham.
Yeah, thanks, Al. I feel like it's also like mid-century modern, right? I'm sure mid-century modern was attacked, especially when it went on Club Boulevard next to a more sort of four square house. We look at California modernism back in the 60s, 50s and 60s, and how those designers were sort of, put under fire for creating these glass boxes. And now these glass boxes are celebrated, and they're considered part of the preservation process. And we pay for a plane ticket to travel across town or travel across, states to go see these beautiful modern forms of preservation. So, right, Kathleen and Ian, do you want to add anything to that conversation?
Well, sure. I think, architectural styles evolve over time. And, those of us who, have worked in the field of preservation our entire careers, we've seen that. And we've seen the perspectives change over time in how we weigh the significance architecturally of a particular building. And so I think, Alicia, you just, actually, pointed out, a very good example of how, priorities in historic preservation changes. I think the nomenclature and the policy issues also evolve and sometimes get stuck in the ditch. And so it's incumbent on us, as Alva pointed out, to pull it out of the ditch. I think the policy boxes that have created certain barriers to listing in the National Register of some historic districts, because they've evolved over time. Certain houses have been repaired differently, so they aren't pristine the way we think they should be pristine. And so, everything has to fit very neatly into that little box. We need to take another look at that because we're losing a lot of important neighborhoods and places that matter to people. And again, expanding the voices who are weighing in on what matters and weighing in on policy changes. The National Register of Historic Places, I'm harping on this because, that's a barrier in getting a house or a building listed in the National Register, which is a barrier to taking advantage of historic tax credits, which is a barrier to being able to preserve some of these places or making the economic argument, which eases the ability for someone to come in and tear down. And it's all connected. It's all interconnected. We are not isolated from the bureaucratic policy issues. We see the impacts, boots on the ground in our communities and what happens. And, truth be told, a lot of our historic districts, there's a diversity to the historic districts in terms of the diversity of the housing, which allows for a diversity of people, both renters and owners, low wealth households, higher wealth households. And, if we don't look at how better to protect these places, we're going to lose these neighborhoods, which offer us inherent baked in affordable housing. And we can't be talking about maintaining or preserving or adding on to affordable housing when we see affordable housing being torn down, in the name of affordable housing. This is crazy. This is, why is this happening? In the name of density, which can happen within, historic neighborhoods. Historically, they have, and we have great examples in Durham of, density, multifamily housing that fit in contextually with the neighborhood and don't look like some alien planet that got plunked down in the middle of the neighborhood, tone deaf around what it's there. I mean, that's disruptive to everybody. Everybody knows when something doesn't fit or something's tone deaf and, turns it back against its neighbors. I mean, that's just offensive. And there's a better way to do that. There are policies out there that provide, what do they call it now? Gentle density, which is probably a nice way of saying, we're checking in on the vibe here in this neighborhood, and we're paying attention to the context. And, locally designated neighborhoods, again, offer a certain amount of protection. You might see a tear down in the 366th day, but what goes back in place does get design review. And I'm all for, expanding, being able to protect some of those most important buildings from just, the 366-day demo. You can do it in the state of North Carolina, but it has to be designated to be of statewide significance, and there's an application process for that.
Thank you, Kathleen.
I could go on.
Yeah, thank you. Chris, are there any questions? We have 5 minutes.
There are not, but Ian,
Okay.
you said you had something.
Yeah, I was going to ask Ian if he wanted to add.
I kind of want to weigh in on that as well. I know I'm not
Ian, if you care to add to the conversation as an expert in the field.
Yeah. I think it is time for a hybridized version of what we have. I don't exactly know what that means, but certainly less stringent national district rules would be one, but also, I think we need to continue to promote the scale and size of cottages, even though they're not going to be old houses that are built, but they might not be that alien planet, touching down on South Alston Avenue or something. And I think the education piece is key. Anyone and everyone that owns property in Durham, and if you own property in Durham, you've probably gotten these little fake handwritten cards in the mail that they're from Ugly House or another wholesaling outfit. It would be good if you got those from Preservation Durham and it said, you have a half an acre lot and you have the ability to create a preservation easement for your house or the 3 lots that you could cut. So I'm sort of dreaming. But if we're relying on those wholesalers, speculators to inform the homeowners, that's not good for preservation. That's good for development. So maybe I'm challenging myself, but so I'll just leave it there.
Could I add something here?
Sure, John, absolutely, always.
Right. I wanted to say, I think, I've grown up, I lived in Durham all my life, and seeing where Durham is now, in some ways, it's what we always wanted it to be, right? It's a great town. It's a very diverse town. And we're all seeing how freaking cool it is. And while the grumpy part of me wants all these people to get out of here, it's pretty great. So I would say that because of that, teardowns are inevitable here. What I would like to see is an ordinance more like what Portland has and implemented in 2016, where you have to, if it's a pre-war house, you have to apply for a deconstruction permit, and the pieces of that house have to be separated and made up for sale. I can't tell you how hard it is to find heart pine flooring to match what we need for our houses. If there were a resource where before these houses were bulldozed in a cloud of lead and asbestos dust, we could pick through doors, trim, framing members, flooring. It would make a huge difference. It would keep it out of our landfill. It would make the new structure, which in many cases are needed because the house isn't habitable, whether it's affordable or not. If a house isn't habitable, then it's got to go. But at least it makes the parts of that house that are usable available to those of us who are trying to save these houses.
Well said, John. And I think that's important to know that while we don't want to tear down, there's just some houses, there's some, it's all about the condition and how the house was cared for. I've taken down 2 houses because, well, one had human feet, I can't even begin to talk about, it couldn't be entered. And then special soil had to be brought to the site because the soil in its own was horrible because of the decay of the house. And so that's important. It's not, it's not this sort of, black or white issue. You just can't check a box. It's not right or wrong. While some developers are doing a disservice to Durham, like John said, he's lived here all his life. I've lived here for going on 27 years, and I came to Durham because of that. It's a very inviting, it's a very, just a wonderful community of people, obviously, that are represented on this panel. And so I thank you all very much for your time.
I wanted to,
Yeah, go ahead,
yeah,
Chris.
just wanted to chime in on that last question. And Ian and John, you'll be very excited to hear that those are things that we're actually actively working on right now. We are in the middle of a strategic planning process to determine how we're going to be interacting with the public for the next 5 to 10 years. And one of my philosophies as a public historian is that the value of any museum, historic site, cultural heritage group, or historic, which we fit in that category, is, does it make people's lives better? And I am proud to say that over the last year, we've made strides in that regard. So, and I'm excited to say that we have started an architectural salvage operation. It is very difficult because we have limited storage space. We are going to, Ian, we're looking at how we're going to engage with the community and owners of, historic properties. That a lot of people don't understand what they have. And so we're exploring all different types of options. And I'm just really excited about the possibilities for Preservation Durham's future. And I'm excited I get to be a part of that.
Fantastic. And I would like first dibs on anything that's Art Deco, Chris. Thank you.
I got you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, panel. I look forward to seeing your faces at the home tour this weekend. I will be a docent at my property. And Toby, I look forward to seeing your home. I'm excited. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.